forget to rate our show and subscribe.
Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 52 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860, or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent of 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. Owen, please don't pee on the lightsaber. This is just one of the statements I thought I'd never hear my wife say to our children. You're listening to the We Are the ADHD Family podcast, and we are picking up our conversation with Melissa Madison. This is the second half of the conversation that was released, and I hope you enjoy the second part of it. I had to edit this original episode due to time, so I've just split it into 2 easy to listen to bite-sized chunks. Well, and not only that, I think the important thing to do, which is what, the 3 of us did, I thought, fairly well, was you got to get the voice of the child in there.
Yes.
And you have to say, how does this make you feel? What are you, give them the opportunities to guide as much of the questions or the answers to the questions that you're asking as you can about their experience of what makes it hard for them, because you don't want to be the parent that sort of goes home and just sort of dumps on the child and, oh, your teacher said you're struggling and this is hard, so if you want to talk, I'm here. Well, no, ask more open-ended questions and try and start the conversation. Yeah. And get the specifics, I think.
Absolutely. And always starting with that sentence stream of tell me more about.
Yeah.
Right? What are your thoughts about? Because if we leave that open, as opposed to, like you said, going in and being like, okay, Mr. So-and-so says that, you're not completing your work on time, or that, you're talking to your friends too much, you're out of your seat too much, or whatever the behavior is. And then the child will automatically go into self-preservation mode.
Yeah.
Right? This is what they want to do. They don't want to disappoint. They might lie about it. They might deny it. There's all sorts of self-preservation coping strategies that children and adults have, right? Yeah. So if we can go in and be like, I had a meeting with Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and they were sharing, that they noticed that maybe you were a little bit off this morning. You want to tell me what was going on for you?
Yep.
What are your thoughts with that?
Yep.
Right. So leaving that openness there and getting the child involved and being like, hey, what feels good for you when you are in morning meeting with Miss Madison? Do you like sitting in a chair instead of on the floor? Would that be better for your body, do you think? Let's brainstorm some strategies. Like, when do you feel really good at school? And when do you feel uncomfortable at school? And talk about that, right? Yeah. So getting the child involved, not necessarily saying, oh, well, we think that you might have autism. Or we think that, you don't necessarily need to go that far, especially right away.
No.
But just trying to get the feedback of the child as well, right?
No, and I think something like that is, something like that, that just sort of jumps the gun entirely, right? Mm-hmm. It's, all of a sudden, you're thinking about this sort of diagnoses or something like that. Like, I remember, like, Owen really didn't know about autism until really the day before, we went over to Sunny Hill. The other thing was that he knew about his ADHD primarily because of me and the stuff that, like, he and I had seen, and, I'm like, we share this, and it's, we share this sort of bond. But everything else before that, before even getting to that point, it talked about, especially the ADHD side, I will forget things if I don't write them down. Do you have that same issue?
Mhm.
And those, do you feel like you can organize yourself? Those are the things that brought us closer together, because he realized that he wasn't being attacked. He's like, Dad feels this way. I
Mhm.
feel this way. He's identifying with that. And we're not throwing a label on there. So it's much better. It's much easier to sit there and I think approach a subject like that, because it isn't about, as much as it is about the diagnosis, it isn't about the diagnosis.
It's
So
about validating and normalizing the experience.
yeah, yeah,
So whether whether it's a behavior because of a diagnosis, or if it's just behavior because it's a learned strategy,
yeah,
it's that part is irrelevant. It's what's the experience, and are you experiencing this too? So being able to validate and normalize those things. And I find that for some, whether they want to introduce, because there's a lot of controversy in terms of, like, sharing with your child what their
yep,
diagnoses are and things like that, and that's a whole other podcast.
yep,
But I think the idea of normalizing the behavior and the experience
yeah,
can provide so much relief for a child, as well as parents too. When you're like, I don't know why my kid keeps X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's because
yeah,
the ADHD and the way that the brain is wired, and so you're like, oh, okay, so now I don't have to discipline or punish my child for this behavior.
no,
Now I know that this is a behavior that needs coaching and needs
yeah,
a new strategy
yeah,
instead, right? So,
yeah,
I remember many years ago, I was teaching grade two at a different school than the one that Owen was at. And there was a child that, we were wondering whether there was some ADHD there. And I was so grateful. The parents, were receptive and went ahead with, investigating that. And he did end up getting a diagnosis of
mhm,
ADHD. And the mom of that child decided to tell her child that this
yeah,
is what it is, and was able to explain it. And I remember her sharing the relief that her child felt,
yeah,
knowing that, being driven by a motor and always feeling like he's driving a race car,
yeah,
is because of the way his brain is wired,
yeah,
and that it's perfectly normal, and that so many other people experience the same things.
yeah,
It was like, oh, I don't have to be ashamed of that behavior. I don't have to be worried about getting in trouble for that behavior, or other things, right? It's like, it's knowing, right?
right.
It's knowing yourself. There's a relief to being having your experience validated and normalized, right?
Yeah, and I don't think, and I mean, not that I want to speak for O, but I don't think he has ever felt ashamed per se. I know there's things he gets frustrated with, like, the
Mhm.
DCD, but at the same time, he doesn't. It's not that he sort of hides from it, and even when I was explaining autism to him, the way that I described it, of that umbrella analogy, where everybody's got an umbrella, and it's everybody's umbrella looks different. These are your unique traits. This is how your brain is wired. And that doesn't make your umbrella any less valid than anybody else's.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to use a big scary word like autism, right?
Mhm.
That's not what, and I think that contribute. I think those kind of labels and stuff, and because we've got a deficits based medical model, it contributes to those stereotypes and everything else, as opposed to, like you've said before, that strengths based way of looking at something. And there can be, for a lot of people, some really good and very cool things that can come out of it. my ability to sit there and hyper focus on something is fantastic. The fact the time blindness sucks. Not realizing sort of where you are, and it takes a heck of a lot of effort to realize those things. But I don't think he has ever felt the shame, and I don't ever want him to. I just want him to know what his strengths are, where his gaps may be, or what needs to be strengthened, and just working on there. Because when you start to see it like that, you're not saying that you're weak, right? It's not strong versus weak. It's nothing to do with that, which I think is where our society very much is in whether it's marketing products. This will get you all the whatever in the world, just get this product. And you go to Yale and you're supposed to get the smartest kids ever. No, it's not that at all. It's, you're the ones who can take those things apart and understand how their brain works and understand where their gaps and strengths are and what's natural to them. I think that's what you want to drive somebody. And I think that's certainly one of the important things you want for any kid growing up as they get older into an adult. Because I know I look at things now and it's like, I need to get to this point, but I'm at this point. Okay. What do I need to do this? And whether it's realistic or not is a whole other thing.
I think we get scared. We get scared of labels a lot, and I feel like that often is a big barrier for parents being open to further testing or assessments that would help kind of figure out some behaviors and things like that. That's often what we get. Well, I don't want my child labeled as ADHD and all that. And it's like, okay, but what you need to understand is that your child getting that diagnosis, okay, so ADHD, I'll just use just because, doesn't do anything within the school system. Like they don't get any kind of designation that comes with that. They don't get funding. They don't get EA time, nothing. But it is put obviously in their file so that the next teacher who gets that child knows that this is something neurodivergent going on and that I am prepared to strategize and to have these certain things in place so that child can succeed in class and reach that full potential and not just cruise on, status quo autopilot. It's about awareness so that your teaching style and your strategies for assessment and behavior management and all those things can be tailored to who's in front of you. And even like, if we were to go as far as getting an autism diagnosis, which does change,
you actually
things
do get funding for it.
The system, right? Explaining that having your child, stamped on the forehead with autism in the school system isn't about having a stamp on their forehead so everyone can go autism, autism, autism. It's about going, okay, this is what we've got going on here. These are the supports required so this child can reach their potential. And great, now that we have this, we can actually receive funding for these extra supports. We can make sure that that child is getting the EA support that they deserve, and that they need. And so it's not about that stamp so that child can walk around with it on their forehead every day. It's so that the system can do what it needs to do in order to support that child. So having parents reframe labels is often one of the first steps to having a willingness to be able to explore further assessments and outside agencies for support.
Well, and it's the thing about you're saying about, the system does what it needs to do. When I was in grade 2, I was held back in grade 3 a year. And this year was very important for me because Owen's going to grade 4. And it means the world for me because I asked my parents about this, and basically trying to remember everything from youth. Youth is really impossible. I always thought that I struggled in certain areas or whatnot, but I said, why was I held back? And they said, I know they didn't have a good relationship with the principal at the time, which I know was one reason. But the other reason was that I, quote unquote, wasn't mature enough. And I was just like, I'm a 9-year-old kid in grade 3. You want me to be mature? What what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so that process of being held back, and then for me, it's like I went from a public school to a private school, and it was just like, no, the experience, like the systems, I mean, are totally different, but not knowing and not having those, and not having that sort of definitive answer of what was going on. And I mean, granted, this was back in 85. So this is a long, ridiculous time ago. The knowledge is not what it is now. Would I have wanted the intervention? I don't know. It's really hard to say. It might have been put the kid on medication and then go from there, and who knows where I would have ended up. But to sort of go through that experience, and now my son, and for that matter, my daughter, has the opposite of it, and that pushing forth and that advocating, it's just funny enough, I'm not exactly mad at my parents about it. It's more like, I don't know, and they've sort of said the same thing, is I don't think that they necessarily would have known what to do. Go out and find a tutor, basically, because there's something wrong with Mark. And that was the mentality back then. And that's not the mentality now, right? There's nothing wrong. I just think different. And so does O, for that matter, or so does Kenzie or you or whoever else. What do you think? How do you think parents can? Do you think there's an effective way for parents to approach a teacher and say, "Hey, we have concerns, and here's what we see, and what kind of information helps"?
Honestly, all information is important. I think that starting the conversations early is key. Um, you know, Early intervention for anything, whether it's academic, behavioral, emotional, mental health, all of it. Early intervention is literally the key to everything. So if you are, keeping observations about your child, to yourself, and not sharing those things with the classroom teacher who's spending a lot of time with that child, you're hindering the process of kind of gearing up the teacher, the EAs, whoever the supports are in the school, from being able to make meaningful observations necessarily, or to be able to make sense of certain observations. So if, 9 times out of 10, you won't share an observation about your child, but your teacher, if they're paying attention, is noticing probably the same thing, right? And is writing it down, but doesn't know the background, doesn't know what's underneath that behavior. So if you share your information about your child, because you know your child best, and now the teacher is observing this same behavior they were before, but with the lens of what they now know from you, it's way more powerful, right? There's so much more power that goes into being able to support a child when you know about them, right? So like for me, every single year in the classroom, I always send out, the in a million words or less, document to parents where they can share anything about their child. What they, and
I remember
there's tons of questions that can guide. If you don't know, but there are other parents, yourself included, who know exactly what to say and need to just say it all. I read every single one of those because not only does it help me at the beginning of the year find out commonalities, or things that, a student enjoys that I can use to build relationship with. Oh, I know that so and so really, is obsessed with Pokemon. Okay, well, I can talk about Pokemon then. And now we're building rapport. And now I have a relationship with that child simply because that parent shared that. Or I know that a parent has shared a custody arrangement between mom and dad, and I know that it's 1 week on, 1 week off. And when I notice behaviors and anxiety start to flare before transition day, okay, that context is so helpful. So now I can help with the front loading to get that child regulated and emotionally ready for the transition to the next parent. And now, right? And it provides everything, right? And allows for an understanding. Not only that, but it also, if I am reading something that a parent has written about their child, I can also start to foster friendships, right? So and so loves Pokemon. Oh, well, mom mentioned that so and so also loves Pokemon, and now I can help, facilitate a conversation. You can gauge a lot about how parents feel and view their child by what they're willing to share with you too. So I will know right away, based on just that simple document, who I need to, maybe, what's the word I'm trying to say? I might need to be more cautious of in terms of sharing observations, or I know that, okay, for instance, that you are, and I say this with so much love, an oversharer, right? That you were
I am.
willing to write me pages in an email, which is not a bad thing. For me, that was not a bad thing. But in doing that, it tells me about who you are, right? And so I go, okay, these are all things that are helpful when you build context around a child, and you can then use that information to build supports.
Well, and I mean, one of the other things, and so I can define, because I know you used front loading. Front loading is when, just because it's a term not everybody might be familiar with, it's when you're giving a child, or giving anybody for that matter, you're saying what's going to happen next, and you can go as many tasks ahead as you need to go for it. I'm going to go get myself a glass of water, and then we're going to go do science class, and then we're going to go do this. And I mean, Owen thrives off of that in his case. I think what's very interesting about what you're saying from the parent point of view and the oversharing side of it is, and this was the perspective that I came from when I wrote that long message of, what of information and things that we were, and I wasn't too sure on what to write. The other reason that I did it was because, I did it because I was concerned. We were both concerned. But number two, we wanted to make sure that it was documented. And like I have said ad nauseum in every single episode, it's really about, you got to document, because if I said something on, I don't know, September 25th of 2019, and you're going for an autism diagnosis or whatever diagnosis, later, a couple years later on, oh, I told Miss Madison about this thing, and this is documented down, and there's something here for this. And then you're like, oh, thank God I did overshare. Thank God I did say what I had to say, because it isn't so much about the school preventing it per se, or something along those lines. It's really about documenting what you're noticing, what you're seeing, and you can tie it back to something. And that's, I think, a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I think when you get to the step of, meeting with specialists in outside agencies like Sunny Hill, they're going to want to know, when did this behavior begin? What did you start noticing? And if you can say, okay, that behavior goes all the way back to when they were a toddler or when they were in preschool, it's a lot easier for that team to then say, okay, so this is the developmental framework that they were working in, age-wise. Okay, we normally see this behavior start here
Yeah.
instead. And so now, again, you've given context to the development of your child, how their brain works, when certain behaviors began, and just overall wonders that you had about your child and their behavior and their regulation skills or whatnot, right? So when
Yeah.
you get that team of experts involved, they're going to want to know that stuff. And so if you document it and you share it, just like you said, with teachers and so on, then yes, you can give yourself credit. You can go back and say, yes, I did see that
Yeah.
behavior. I did mention that behavior, and then we tried the strategy and it didn't work. Or we tried the strategy and it was really successful. So then I
Yeah.
shared that with the teacher and we started using that. Or, like it just being able
Well,
to
and
document.
that's what, and I remember specifically, that's what you and I were doing, and Siobhan too. It's like, if he gets, I remember saying about the running, if he gets really mad or upset,
Mhm.
he may need to go for a run outside, and he just might need to just move out of somewhere else. Because we had seen we'd seen the whole range of everything from him in terms of how he deals with something that's bad.
Mhm.
And I think that those kind of things could be not life-saving. I don't know if that's a little too much of an overstatement, but I think it might be the right word, because the child goes back home, they've got that aspect of their day to consider, and they have to unload, and they have to, at home, they don't really have to hide or anything like that. They'll just unleash for the most part.
Mhm.
And
Y-
that's a lot of stuff that's what's the word? That's a lot that can be built up for a kid over a day. A lot.
Absolutely. And the opposite can be true where school ends up becoming the
Oh, yes.
cesspool,
Yeah.
right? So
And they're
then you're
perfectly fine at
noticing,
home.
and they're perfectly fine at home. And so then you have that to, wonder about as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The conversation continues in the next episode when Melissa and I discuss working with resistant parents, how parents are the key to connecting resources and services, universal design and its role in the classroom, how a school-based team works, who it's comprised of, and my experience with our school's SBT, or school-based team, the constraint on psych eds, and why is it so hard to get support for kids. See you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to our show.
One of the things that we love about Owen is how literal he is. There was a joke that we used to say to him that he would never understand. He does now, so he catches it. But we would tell him, "Hey, Owen, can you hold your horses?" And then he'd go, "I don't have any horses, Dad." Now when we try to tell him this joke, he just catches us and he's like, "That doesn't work on me anymore." If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD Family.
See you soon for a new episode. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated. Any medical information on this site and podcast is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for a professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or guidance about a specific medical condition. The show, host, and its guests expressly disclaim responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or show. By visiting this site and listening to this show, you agree to the terms and conditions, which may from time to time change or be supplemented by the show host.